Sham Sharadava Nalalida Loka Tranaya Karuna Gana Ganatam Sham Sharadava Nalalida Loka Tranaya Karuna Gana Ganatam Praptasya Kalyanam Gurnanavasya Bande Gurashi Charanarvindam Praptasya Kalyanam Bande Gurashi Charanarvindam Bande Gurashi Charanarvindam Mahaprabhu ki Tananita Gita Vaditramadhyam Manasurasena Mahaprabhu ki Romancha Kampasru Taranga Vajo Vande Gurashi Charanarvindam Shri Vigrahara Dana Nityanana Shringara Tanama Niramajanado Juktasya Bhaktamsya Neyunjatapi Vande Gurashi Charanarvindam Chaturvidhashi Bhagavat Prasada Swatana Triptan Hari Bhakta Sangha Chaturvidhashi Bhagavat Prasada Swatana Triptan Kridvaiva Tripte Bhajata Shadeva Vande Gurashi Charanarvindam Bhajata Sadeva Vande Gurashi Shiradikama Dhavayara Para Madhura Leela Gunarupa Namna Shiradikama Para Madhura Leela Gunarupa Namna Pratechanasva Dhanalalupasya Vande Gurashi Charanarvindam Ne kunjayuno Ratikeli Siddhai Jayali Viri Yukti Apekshaneya Ne kunjayuno Ratikeli Siddhai Jayali Viri Yukti Apekshaneya Tatra Tidaksha Ativalavasya Vande Gurashi Charanarvindam Tatra Tidaksha Yashadharidvena Shamasta Shashre Ruktastatthava Yataiva Sadhuvi Kintu Prabhoja Priya Eva Tasya Kande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Yasya Prasada Bhagavat Prasada Yasya Prasadam Nagati Kutapi Yasya Prasadam Bhagavat Prasadam Yasya Prasadam Nagati Kutapi Dayam Stuvam Tasya Yasatrin Sandhyam Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Dayam Vande Guru Shri Dayam Stuvam Tassa Yasatri Sandhyam Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunavadi Pachatarisha Tarine Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunavadi Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Shri Tanya Prabhu Nityananda Nityananda. Oh, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hariyaraye Namah, Krishna Jadavaye Namah, Jadavaye Madhavaya Keshavaya Namaha, Gopal Govindaram Shimadhusudan, Giridhari Gopinath Madana Mohan, Shri Chaitanya Nityananda Shri Advaita Sita, Hari Guru Vaishnava Bhagavata Gita, Shri Rupa Sanatan Vataraguna, Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasaraguna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Shri Radha Nila Madhav, Radha Nila Madhav Radhe, Radha Nila Madhav, Jaya Jagannath, Jaya Baladeva, Jaya Subhadrama, Jaya Sudarshan Chakra, Jaya Baladeva, Jaya Subhadrama, Nitai Gaur Haribo, 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 Nitai Gaur, Haribo, 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 Nitai Gaur, Manandi. Haribo, Jai Vishnu Paranam Saparvaja Kachari Sukrishna, Shivan Grace of Vacharamina Bhakti Viranta Samara Shila Prabhupada. His competition with his sons of the Vaishnava Samani Patita Pavana, Shila Prabhupada Maharaj ki jai. Shri Gurya Guru Varga Bhakti Udhar ki jai. Shri Rupa Sanatana Bhadra Gunata Shri Gopala Bhadra Sakla Sarvita Prabhu ki jai. Namacharya Shila Haridas Thakur ji ki jai. Ananta Kut Vaishnavindi ki jai. Prem Sikho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shvasari Gaur Bhaktavindi ki jai. Jai Param Dayal Sri Nityananda Prabhu ki jai. Jai Prabhu Naam Sankirtane Ki Janaka Prima Purushottam Shri Satyananda Nishma Gurama Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Gaur Hari Mavrana Avatar ki jai. Golokera Pramadhan Inam Sankirtan Jaiga ki jai. Yoga Dharma Hare Krishna Mahamantra ki jai. Brihatnidanga Transcendental Book Distribution Seva ki jai. Shri Radha Krishna Gopagopina Radha Kun Sama Kungri Raj Govardhan ki jai. Shri Brajavam Vrindavan Maturdam ki jai. Yellow Shri Radha Nilamadhava ki jai. Shri Mayapur Navadvip Eka Chakra Dham ki jai. Shri Paramakaruna Shri Gaur Nitai ki jai. Shri Purushottama Ketra Jagannath Pridham ki jai. Shri Shri Jagannath Swami Baladev Prabhu Smasvadra Devi Sudarshan Chakra Bhagavan ki jai. Bhakti Sarva Vigna Vinashna Kanishinga Deva Bhan ki jai. Jaganga Mai Jamuna Mai ki jai. Tulasi Maharani Vrindi Devi Bhakti Devi ki jai. Shri Matiradharani ki jai. Shamavita Bhakta Vrindi ki jai. Nitai Gaurari Pramani. All glory to the Assembly devotees. All glory to the Assembly devotees. All glory to the Assembly devotees. All glories, glory to Shri Guru Shri Gauranga Hari. Namaste Narasimhaya. Praladada Dadaine Hiranyakashipu Bhaksha Silatanka Nakalaye Ita Nisinga Parata Nisinga Jato Jato Jami Tato Nisinga Bayiri Nisinga Rudaye Nisinga Narasimhamadin Sharanam Prapade Tava Karakamalavare Naka Adabhuta Singam Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanabringam Kesavadruta Narari Rupa Jai Jagadishare Jai Jagadishare Jai Jagadishare Tava Karakamalavare Naka Adbhuta Singam Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanavinga Kesavadrita Narari Rupa Jai Jagadish Hare, Jai Jagadish Hare, Jai Jagadish Hare, Jaya Nishangare, Jaya Nishangare, Jaya Nishangare, Jaya Nishangare. Jaya Narahari, 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 Jaya Narahari. Jaya Lakshmi Narasingha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasingha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasingha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasingha. Jaya Prahlad Mara, Prahlad Mara, Bhakta Prahlad, Sila Prahlad Mara. Nittai Gaura Haribo, 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 Nittai Gaura Haribo. Jai Shri Bhakti Pata Sarvignash Krishna Hari Bhagwan ki Jai, Bhakta Shristha Prahlad Maharaj ki Jai, Nitai Gaurari Premanande, Hari Hari Bol. Tulasi Devai Priyayai Ke Savasatya Vishnu Bhakti Pradidevi Shatavatai Namo Namaha. Vrindayai Tulasi Devai Priyayai Ke Savasatya Vishnu Bhakti Pradidevi Shatavatai Namo Namaha. Vrindayai Tulasi Devai Priyayai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Pradidevi Shatavatai Namo Namaha. Shrimati Tulasi Maharani Vrindadevi ki Jai. तारा वंचा पुना
कृपा कोरी कोरो तारे वृंदावन वासी
तुम्हें कृपा करे करा करे वृंदावनवासी
मोराए अभिलाष विलास कुंज दियो वास नयने हरि वो सदा जुगल रूपरासी इनी विदाना धारो साखीर अनुगाता कोरो सेवा अधिकारा दिए कोरो निज दासी दीना कृष्णा दासे कोए ए जीना मोरा होए श्री राधा गोविंदा प्रेमे सदा जीना भासी श्री राधा गोविंदा प्रेमे सदा जीना भासी यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्माहत्याधिकानि च प्रणाशन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्माहत्याधिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणाशन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्माहत्याधिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणाशन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Hare.
हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे
Hare Krishna, Vrindadevi Jaya Vrindadevi Jaya Vrindadevi Jaya Vrindadevi
Nityai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nityai Gaura Hari Bol, Nityai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nityai Gaura Hari Bol. Srimati Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki jai.
Jai Shri Vrindai Tulasi Devai Priyai Kesava Satya Krishna Bhakti Prade Devi Satavadaya Vrindai Tulasi Devai Priyai Kesava Satya Krishna Bhakti Prade Devi Satavadaya Vrindayai Tulasi Devai Priyayai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Shatavadaya Jai Shrimati Tulasi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki Jai. Oh Tulsi, beloved Krishna, I bow before you again and again. My desire to obtain the service of Shri Radha and Krishna. Whoever takes shelter of you, his wishes fulfilled. Bestow your mercy upon him, you make him resident of Vrindavan. My desire is that you also give me a residence from your throne to Shri Vrindavan Dham. Thus, within my vision, I will always behold beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna. I beg you to make me a follower carrying of Raj. Please give me the privilege of personal service and make me your own way service. It's very full and the Lord is serving Krishna. May I always sing about Shri Radha. Shrimati Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Krishna Kanti Jai. Anandamudivardhanam Pratipadam Purnamita Shadanam Sarvadnaslam Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namagari Gauta Jasarva Shaktis Tatrar Pitaniyamita Shmarane Nakala Itadrushi Tava Kripaya Bhagavan Namati Durdaiva Midrishamya Janinanuraga Trinadapi Sunichena Tarorapi Saishnuna Amani Namanadina Kirtaniya Sada Hari Nadhanam Najanam Nasundarim Kavitam Vaja Garishakamaye Mama Janmane Janmaneshwari Bhavatar Bhakti Rahituki Tvai Ainandatanu Kinkaram Paritamam Visame Bhavambudu Payatava Pada Pankaja Sitaduli Sadrisham Vichintaya Nayanam Galara Shudharaya Vadanam Gadagada Vidaya Gira Urakari Chitam Bapukada Bhavisati Juga Itam Nimishena Chakusha Pravusa Itam Shunya Itam Jagata Sarvam Govinda Virahe Name Asli Shabapa Daratam Pinashtuma Adarshnar Marmahatam Karotuva Jatathava Vidadatu Lampoto Matpranatastu Saivana Para Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shiksharstakam Ki Jai. Namo Varanaya Krishna Prema Pradayati Krishna Krishna Chaitanya Namine Gaura Krishna. Glory to the Shri Krishna Sankirtana, which cleanses the heart all the dust accumulated for years, and extinguishes the fiery condition of life of repeated birth and death. This Sankirtana movement is the prime benediction for humanity at large. God is praised the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss and enables us to fully test the nectar for which all is anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings. And thus you have hundreds of millions of names like Krishna and Govind. In these transcendental names, you have invested all your transcendental energies. There are no hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness you enable us to easily approach you by your holy names. But I'm so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. Once you chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than straw in the street, one should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respect to others. In such state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your cause that was on service, birth after birth. O son of Maharajananda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor. Yes, somehow or other I have fallen in this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. Oh, my Lord. When my eyes will be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name, when will my voice choke up, and will the hairs of my body stand on end the recitation of your name? Oh, Govinda, feeling your separation, I'm considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I feel all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna as my Lord, and he shall remain so. Even if he handles me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me, he is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worship before Lord, unconditionally. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shiksharstakam Ki Jai. Namo Varanaya Krishna Prema Pradayati Krishna Krishna Chaitanya Krishna. There are 10 offenses in the matter of chanting the holy name of the Lord that should be avoided. They are as follows. 1. To blaspheme the devotees who dedicate their life for propagating the holy name of the Lord. 2. To consider names of demigods, the Lord Shiva or Brahma, to be equal to or independent of a name Lord Vishnu. 3. To disobey the orders of the spiritual master. 4. To blaspheme the Vedic literature or literatures and pursuits of Vedic version. 5. To consider the glories of chanting Hare Krishna to be imagination. 6. To give some interpretation on the holy name of the Lord. 7. To commit sinful activities on the strength of chanting the holy name of the Lord. 8. To consider chanting Hare Krishna as one of the auspicious ritualistic activities which are offered in Vedas, spiritual activity, karma kanda. 9. To instruct the faithless person about the glories of the holy name. And 10. To not have complete faith in chanting the holy names and to maintain material attachments, even after understanding so many instructions on this matter. It was so an offense, chanting while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be Vaishnava must carefully guard against 10 offenses in order to quickly achieve desired success. Krishna. Pray. Now let us offer our most humble obeisances unto all the Vaishnavas, devoted with the Lord. They are just for desired trees, they can fulfill the desires of everyone, and they are full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. Vancha Kulpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vevacha Paritanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jayananta Koti Vaishnavindiki. Ganandhara Salakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manubhishtam Sthapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Saparantikam Vandiham Shri Guru Shri Juttavarakamanam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sakjatam Sahavanam Gunatavitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Shri Radha Krishna Padam
Mangala Aarti Vitam Sa Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutali Srimate Jivedanta Swami Tinamini Namaste Saraswati Deve Guruvani Pracharine Nirvisesa Srimavadi Taskatya Satarine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutali Srimate Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Namini Shri Varsavanavi Devi Dayitaya Kripabdaye Krishna Sambandha Grigyana Dayane Parvahe Namaha Madhur Ujjvala Premadya Shri Rupanuga Bhaktida Shri Gaura Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute Namaste Vani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine Dupanuga Virudapa Apasiddhanta Dvantaharine Namo Guru Kishoraya Sakshat Vairagya Murtaye Vipralambara Sambodhe Padambujayate Namaha Namo Bhakti Vinodaya Sachitananda Namine Guru Shakti Swarupaya Rupanuga Varayate Guru Virbhavunestvam Nirdesta Sajjana Priya Vaishnava Sarvabhaumastri Jagannatayate Namaha Vanchakalpatarabhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahabhadanyaya Krishna Prema Padayate Krishna Krishna Chaitanya Namne Guru Tuse Namaha Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhaktarupa Swarupakam Bhaktavataram Bhaktakam Namami Bhaktasaktikam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Jayatam Suratur Pangur Mama Mandamatir Gati Matsarvasva Padambujo Radha Madana Mohano Divyadvindaranya Kalpradumadaha Shimad Ratnagara Simhasanastito Shimad Radha Shila Govinda Devo Prastali Bihi Sevyamanam Smarami Shiman Rasarambi Vamsivata Tatastita Karsan Venuswanir Gopir Gopinatakstriye Suna Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwani Rishabhanustute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktivindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Guru Pranama Prayers Ki Jai Shri Brahma Samhita Ki Jai Ishwara Parama Krishna Sachitananda Vigraha Anadiradir Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam Chintamani Prakarasadma Sukalpa Riksha Laksha Vritesa Surabhira Vipalihantam Lakshmi Sahasra Satasambrahma Sevyamanam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Venun Kvananta Aruvenda Dalaya Taksham Parhavatam Samasitam Buddhasundarangam Kandarpa Koti Kamaniya Vishesha Sobham Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Alola Chandra Kalasad Vanamalya Vamsi Ratnam Gadam Pranayakeli Kalavilasam Shamam Jamangalalita Niyata Prakasam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Angani Yasya Sakalan priyavritti manti pasyanti panti kalyanti chiram jaganti ananda chinmaya sadujvala vigrahasya govindam adi purusham tamaham bhajami advaitam achyutam anadim anantarupam Adyam Purana Purusham Navayovanam Cha Vede Sudurlabam Adurlabam Atma Bhakto Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Pantastu Koti Satavatsala Sampragamyo Vayo Ratapi Manaso Munipungamanam Sopyasti Yat Prapadasim Yavicintya Tatve Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ekopya Sora Chayatam Jagadanda Kotim Kotis Jaya Yadanta Andanta Rasta Paramanu Chayanta Rastam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yad Bhava Bhavita Diyo Manajasta Taiva Sampraptya Rupa Mahima Sanayana Bhusa Suktaryameva Nigama Pratitaistuvanti Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasat Pratibhavitabis Tabirya Eva Nijarupa Tayakalabi Goloka Eva Nivasata Kilatma Bhuto Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochanena Santaksadeva Hidayesu Vilokayanti Yam Shama Sundaram Achintya Gunaswarupam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ramadi Murti Sukalani Amenatistan Nanavataram Akarod Bhuvane Sukintu Krishna Swayam Samabhavat Paramam Pumam Yo Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yasya Prabha Prabhavato Jagadanda Koti Kotisvasesu Vasudadi Vibhuti Vinam Tad Brahma Niskalam Anantam Asesa Bhutam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Maya Hiyasya Jagadanda Satani Sute Trigunya Tad Visayaveda Vitayamanam Sattva-valambi Parasatvam Visuddha Sattvam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasat Mataya Manasu Ya Praninam Pratifulam Smaratam Upetya Lilayatena Bhuvanani Jaya Yajasram Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Goloka Namni Nijadamni Tale Chatasya Devi Mahesa Haridama Sute Sutesu Te Te Prabhava Nichaya Vihitascha Yena Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Shrististati Pralaya Sadhana Sakti Reka Chayeva Yasya Bhuvanani Vibharti Durga Ichana Rupam Abhyasya Chachesta Tesa Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Shiram Yata Dadi Vikara Visesa Yoga Sanjayate Nahitata Pritakasti Hetu Yasambhutam Apitata Samapaitikar Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Deeparchadeva Hita Santaram Abhyupetya Deepayate Vivita Hetu Samanu Dharma Yastadrigeva Hitya Vishnu Tayavibhati Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yakarna Narnava Jale Bhajatisma Yoga Nidram Ananta Jagadanda Saroma Kupa Adhara Shakti Avalamya Param Smarurtem Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yasyaika Nisvasita Kalamatavalamya Jivanti Loma Vilaja Jagadandanata Vishnur Mahansahi Yasya Kalaviseso Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Basman Yatasma Sakalesu Najesu Teja Sriyam Kiyat Prakatayat Apitat Vadatra Brahmaya Esa Jagadanda Vidana Karta Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yat Pada Palava Yugam Vinidaya Kumbha Dwande Pranama Samayesa Ganadi Raja Vignan Vihanta Malamasya Jakatrayasya Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Agnir Mahika Ganamambu Maruddhisascha Kalas Tatatma Manasiti Jagatrayani Yasmad Bhavanti Vibhavanti Visanti Yamcha Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yaschak Suresa Savita Sakalagrahanam Raja Samasta Suramurti Rasesa Teja Yasya Gaya Brahmati Sambrita Kala Chakro Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Dharmo Tapapa Nichaya Sutayasta Pamsi Brahma Dikita Patakava Deyasta Jiva Yadata Matra Vibhava Pakata Bhavava Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yastrindra Gopa Matavendra Mahosva Karma Bandhan Rupa Falabhajana Matanoti Karmani Nirdahati Kintu Purucha Bhakti Bhajam Govindam Adi Purusham Tapaham Bhajami Yam Krodha Kama Sahaja Pranayadi Bitti Vatsalya Moha Guru Gaurava Sevya Bhavai Sanchintya Tasya Sadrisim Tanamapurete Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Shiyakanta Kanta Parama Purusha Kalpataravo Dumabhumis Chintamani Ganama Itoyam Amritam Kataganam Gatyam Gamanam Apivam Sipriyasaki Chidanandam Jyoti Param Apitadaswatyam Apicha Sayatra Siradi Bhisravati Surabhi Vyasta Sumahan Nime Sardakyuva Rajati Nahiyatra Pisamaya Vajay Sritadvibham Tamaham Iha Golokam Itiyam Vidantaste Santakshiti Viralachara Katipaye Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchitananda Vigraha Anadiradi Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam Shri Brahma Samhita Ki Jai. Shri Guru Pranama Prayers Ki Jai. The spiritual master is receiving benediction from the ocean of mercy. Just as a cloud pours water on a forest fire to extinguish it, so the spiritual master delivers the materially afflicted world by extinguishing the blazing fire of material existence. I offer my respectful obeisance unto lotus feet of such a spiritual master who is an ocean of auspicious qualities. Chanting the holy name, dancing in ecstasy, singing and playing musical instruments, the spiritual master is always gladdened by the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Because he is relishing the mellows of pure devotion within his mind, sometimes his hair stands on end, he feels quivering in his body, and tears flow from his eyes like torrents of rain. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always engaged in a temple worship of Shri Radha and Krishna. He also engages his disciples in such worship. They dress the deities in beautiful clothes and ornaments, clean their temple, and perform other similar worship of the Lord. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always offering Krishna 4 kinds of delicious food, analyzes that which is licked, chewed, drunk, and sucked. When the spiritual master sees that the devotees are satisfied by eating Bhagavad Prasada, he is satisfied. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always eager to hear and chant about the unlimited conjugal pastimes of Radhika and Madhava and their qualities, names, and forms. The spiritual master aspires to relish these at every moment. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is very dear because he is expert in assisting the gopis who at different times make different tasteful arrangements for the perfection of Radha and Krishna's conjugal loving affairs within the groves of Vrindavan. I offer my most humble obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is to be honored as much as the Supreme Lord because he is the most confidential servant to the Lord. This is acknowledged in all revealed scriptures and followed by all authorities. Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master who is a bona fide representative of Shri Hare Krishna. By the mercy of the spiritual master, one receives the benediction of Krishna. Without the grace of the spiritual master, one cannot make any advancement. Therefore, I should always remember and praise the spiritual master. At least 3 times a day, I should offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Gaura Premanandi Hari Bol. Shrimad Bhagavatam Grantaraj Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 10, verse number 30. Nididya Sur Atmamayam Hridayam Nirabidyata Tatomanas Chandra Iti Sankalpa Kama Evacha Nididhyasa, being desirous to know. Atma Mayam, own energy. Hridayam, the location of the mind. Nirabhidyata, was manifested. Tata, thereafter. Mana, the mind. Chandra, the controlling deity of the mind. The moon. Iti, thus. Sankalpa, determination. Kama, desire. Eva, as much as. Cha, also. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. When there was a desire to think about the activities of his own energy, then the heart, the seat of the mind, the moon, determination, and all desire became manifested. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The heart of every living entity is the seat of the Supersoul, Paramatma, a plenary expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Without his presence, the living entity cannot get into the working energy according to his past deeds. The living entities who are endowed with the material world, the living entities who are conditioned in the material world are manifested in the creation in terms of respective inclinations inherent in them. And the requisite material body is offered to each and every one of them by the material energy under the direction of the Supersoul. This is explained in the Bhagavad Gita 9.10. When, therefore, the Supersoul is situated in the heart of the conditioned soul, the requisite mind is manifested in the conditioned soul, and he becomes conscious of his occupation as one is conscious of his duty after waking up from slumber. Therefore, the material mind of the living entity develops when the Supersoul sits on his heart, after which the mind, the controlling deity, moon, and then the activities of the mind, namely thinking, feeling, and willing, all take place. The activities of mind cannot begin without the manifestation of the heart, and the heart becomes manifested when the Lord wants to see the activities of the material creation. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. When there was a desire to think about the activities of his own energy, then the heart, the seat of the mind, the moon, determination, and all desire became manifested. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So everything depends on the desire of the Lord. And then the fate, F-A-T-E, not faith, F-I-T-H, but F-A-T-E, the fate of the living entity depends on the living entity's desire and inclination. So Krishna wants to see the activity of his energy, his own energy. So he has different energies. Of course, he's talking about the apara prakriti, the inferior spiritual energy of the Lord, called the material world. So when there was a desire to think about the activities of his, meaning Krishna's own energy, then the heart, the seat of the mind, the moon, determination, and all desire became manifested. So the relationship between the mind of the living entity and the heart of the living entity is something that people take for granted, but there's a reason for it. The mind is not the brain. There's a difference between the mind and the brain. You would think there would be some relationship between the mind and the brain. Actually, it's between the mind and the heart. Why? Because the heart is the seat of the jiva as well as the supersoul, or Paramatma. So the mind of the living entity is something subtle, it is not gross, so it's not the brain. All the scientists, everything, they when you say mind, they think of the brain. But mind is much more subtle than the brain. The brain might be functioning in certain ways, that's for sure, but the mind is above that, because the brain is part of the body, so the mind is superior to the body, because it's more subtle element. You say there's body, mind, intelligence, and false ego. So the false ego is made up of the mind and intelligence and the ego. So when it's false identification, it becomes mind, intelligence, and false ego. When it's correct identification, it's mind, intelligence, and ego. So the heart is the seat of the mind. There it is, right there. It doesn't say the brain is the seat of the mind. It's the heart is the seat of the mind. So then it says, then the heart, the seat of the mind, the moon, determination, and all desire become manifested. So now this becomes more interesting because the moon is also related with the mind. And then the ability to make a determination is in that same sequence. And then all desires become manifested, right? All desire become manifested. So this is the correct sequence of things to understand. And when we understand this, then we realize that without the existence of the presence of Supersoul or Paramatma in the heart of a living entity, the body would not be able to function. The jiva by itself is not enough to make everything work. The Supersoul has to be there because the Supersoul is the source of, as it says, Sarva Sichaham Hidi Sanivisto. So it means that in the heart of the living entity, the Supersoul is present. Matak Smritir Jnanam Apahanam Cha. So, and he gives remembrance and knowledge and also forgetfulness. Okay, so without the ability to remember, we would wake up every morning confused. Well, who am I exactly? If you can't remember who you are, without that memory, you would be completely bewildered. You wouldn't know who you are every morning, and what your duty is in life, and you wouldn't know what your history is. So the Supersoul is the source of remembrance and knowledge, as well as forgetfulness. Okay, so in order to make a determination, there has to be thinking, feeling, and willing. They have to take place. So, therefore, in order to think, feel, and will, there has to be senses. So that's coming next. And then, so all this is the process of creation. It's going in a sequence, and every step is complicated. Therefore, we can understand nothing can happen without Krishna's superintendence. Impossible. And the scientists ignore all this, and they just fluff over crucial steps in the process of creation because they don't understand it. So they go right away to the first amoeba. They don't say how it came about, or they come up with speculative theories about how it came about. They say there was at one time, after the Big Bang, there was a primordial soup. This is after the Big Bang took place, and then some planets became visible, and on the North Pole or South Pole of a particular planet, there was a primordial soup with amino acids, and it got zapped by electricity, by a thunderbolt, and the first amoeba developed. This is complete, fantasy. They don't have any proof that that actually happened. They can't reproduce that phenomenon. They might be able to, in a nutrient base, they might be able to zap it with electricity and produce some amino acids, but that's not a one-celled living being. They're just components there might be some amino acids in a one-cell living being, but just because you zapped some soup and made a few amino acids doesn't mean that you have a living being. Okay. They have tried to zap a primordial soup. What's a primordial soup? Well, it's got nutrients in it, different things. It could have parts of dead fish or whatever, and you zap it, and maybe a few amino acids will come out of it. Okay, so what's very interesting about this is the sequence, and that is the Lord desires to see the activities of his own energy, para-prakriti, and then the heart, the seat of the mind, and then the mind, and then the moon, and then determination, and then all desire became manifested. So I'll go over this purport again because it's very important. It says, the heart of every living entity is the seat of the Supersoul Paramatma, a plenary expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Without his presence, the living entity cannot get into the working energy according to his past deeds. So look at how he phrased this. It says, without the Supersoul's presence, the living entity cannot get into the working energy according to his past deeds. That's a strange phrase, get into the working energy. So, in other words, there was, in previous life, desires. And in order to satisfy desires, you need senses and you need energy. So, this is all happening because of the Supersoul. That's the whole point. Without the Supersoul, none of this would happen. The scientists say, well, it happened, there was a soup and, like Campbell's soup or something, and it got zapped by some electricity, and all of a sudden there was one amoeba, and then it evolved from there. That's complete nonsense. There's no proof. It's not scientific. They would have to do an experiment and actually produce an amoeba, a one-cell living being. Then they would have some concrete evidence that this theory has some foundation to it. But they've never done that. They've tried, but it never produced a living entity. Life does not come from chemicals or earth or water or fire or air. It doesn't come from that. It comes from the soul, and the soul is impregnated into the material world by Krishna, the living entities, souls. So it's not that there's no soul. There are two souls. There's Paramatma and there's the Jivatma, and they're not material things. The people don't understand this, and this is not this. And the way they teach the evolution, according to Darwin, is completely false. We made this point yesterday. The kids, you studied it, right? Did they say it was science? Yeah. By the way, because Mataji said she never studied it, I talked to her. She was fortunate enough to drop out of school. So she was not indoctrinated into this falsity, and because she was a devotee, and in Guyana, I'll have her explain her history. It's very interesting, and she was saved from all the nonsense, right? And her only desire has been her whole life to be able to live near a temple and be able to do devotional service. And she was explaining that to me, because I was surprised when she said she never heard this, right? All of you had heard Darwin. She never, because she dropped out of school. So, bravo to Guyana. We should send our kids to Guyana to get educated. Yeah. And she always lived near a temple in Guyana. Huh? She always lived near a temple in Guyana, and she would go every day to the temple and do service. And that's what she's doing now also. You know? So she's an exceptional person. You see, well, it's not necessary to have this education. There's someone says, well, how are you going to work? Well, there are many ways you can. Look at Janavatsala. He never went to school to learn how to do what he's doing. He just did apprenticeship with people. And he was an apprentice to some guy who was a construction guy, and he learned a lot of tricks there. And then he worked with some electrician, and he learned some electricity. He doesn't have any degrees, right? But he learned all these things practically, and he can make a living, right? He makes a living. So you don't really need this education, because most of it is going to be a bunch of nonsense, right? That just engenders atheism. Okay, so then it says, without his presence, the living entity cannot get into the working energy according to his past deeds. So in other words, how do you get this working energy? It's coming from the supersoul. And it's investing this working energy into the heart of the living entity so that he can begin to resuscitate the desires he had and inclination he had from the previous life. Right? Resuscitate means bring it back to life. You need energy. So that, like if your battery is dead in your cell phone, it doesn't work. It doesn't have any energy. If your battery is dead in your car, it doesn't work. There's no energy. You see? So in the same way, where is that energy coming from? From the supreme energetic, from Krishna, who is the super soul in everybody's heart. Okay, and then it says, without his presence, the living entity cannot get into the working energy according to his past deeds. The living entities who are conditioned in the material world are manifested in the creation in terms of respective inclinations inherent in them. Now, what is an inclination? The dictionary says, a person's natural tendency or urge to act or feel in a particular way, a disposition or propensity. So we all have inclinations from previous life, right? What is the inclination? Well, it's let me have sense gratification, but I want it in this particular way, you know, as a Latino or as a American or as a Russian or whatever, you know. So those inclinations will determine what kind of body one gets, right? So, like for example, you know, if you have a strong inclination for eating pizza, well, you probably take birth, huh? No, actually, probably in the United States, there's more pizza parlors in the United States than Italy, right? Or India. India, the pizza is a big thing in India now. You know. In Mayapur, to eat pizza in Mayapur. Pizza is a big thing in Mayapur, very big thing. It's become a big thing in this temple also. So, the living entities who are conditioned in the material world are manifested in the creation in terms of respective inclinations inherent in them, and the requisite material body is offered to each and every one of them by the material energy under the direction of Supersoul. See, nothing is happening without the Supersoul. Okay, so then what is Krishna consciousness all about? I'm going to tell you that now. It's a beautiful lecture by Srila Prabhupada. And in the third canto, what verse is it? Third canto. third canto, 25th chapter, 43rd verse. It's an amazing lecture. I'm not going to go over the whole thing, but there's some wonderful points that Prabhupada makes. And he says, by vairagya, what does vairagya mean? It means we don't want material opulence. That's what it actually means. So why? Because you have something much better. You have Krishna. It's much better than material opulence. So Prabhupada says, just like you, boys and girls who have joined this movement, you have understood to some extent that we don't require this material opulence. We want Krishna. There you go. This is education, right? We don't require material opulence. We want Krishna. So and then so vairagya means, so the idea that we don't want this material opulence, that is called vairagya, renunciation. Okay? And why you want Krishna? Because Krishna is your eternal master, eternal father. That is called jnana. Jnana vairagya yuktena. Not sentimental. We must know very clearly what is Krishna. That is jnana, knowledge. And it means, what is my relationship with Krishna? That is jnana. And what is my duty to Krishna? That is jnana. And as soon as you know all these things, what is Krishna, what you are, what is your relationship, and what is your duty, then naturally you become reluctant to these material activities. That is called vairagya. This is a short paragraph. It is absolutely amazing what it's saying. And this is the real purpose of Krishna conscious education. Let me read that again because it's so very profound. Just like you, boys and girls, he's talking about the devotees, that he's giving a lecture and the devotees are sitting down like this and listening. You boys and girls who have joined this movement, you have understood to some extent that we don't require this material opulence. We want Krishna. So the idea that we don't want this material opulence, that is called vairagya, renunciation. And why you want Krishna? Because Krishna is your eternal master, eternal father. That is called jnana. Jnana vairagya yuktena. Not sentimental. We must know very clearly what is Krishna. That is jnana, or knowledge. What is, and it's understood as, one, what is my relationship with Krishna? That is jnana. And two, what is my duty to Krishna? That's also jnana, knowledge. And as soon as you know these things, what is Krishna, what you are, what your duty to Krishna is, that is jnana, that is real knowledge. And as soon as you know all these things, then naturally you become reluctant to these material activities. That is called vairagya, or renunciation. So it says, Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Gyanayat Yasa Vairagyam Gyanam Chayat Ahaitukam. So one who engages in devotional service, they naturally develop renunciation and knowledge. You don't have to study in a materialistic school to learn real knowledge and real renunciation. You just come to the temple on a regular basis and hear Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and you will learn real knowledge and real renunciation. And see, most people don't understand. The attraction to opulence, material opulence, is Maya. It's not a desirable thing. And Prabhupada says it's better to be poor. Just like Mataji grew up in Guyana, and she probably was not in a rich family. It was just probably a lower middle class or poor family. But she got a good education. She's a devotee. And she's been a devotee all her life. That's a good education, right? And she got a good husband, so he goes and earns a lot of money from Microsoft, okay. But see, she didn't have to go to school. She just had to be a good devotee. And she has a good husband who's willing to work hard, and she can come to the temple. She comes to the temple. I see her come every afternoon. She's doing the flowers, doing this, doing that. Her whole life is based on devotional service. So, is that a good life? Yes, it's a very good life. Right? And then you see Rasavati. She's also born in Fiji. Practically all her life, she's been a devotee. You know, she doesn't have some big education, doesn't have any degrees, but she's a devotee. And she's always Krishna conscious. Right? So this is real knowledge and renunciation. This is the reality, so that one can remember Krishna. Their whole life they're connected to Krishna. So it's easy to remember Krishna at the moment of death, and they go back to Godhead. They solve all their problems. No more birth, no more death, no more old age, no more disease. They have the spiritual body. Now, Prabhupada talks about the spiritual body. I'm going to read this whole thing on another day. There's another very important point he makes. He says, so jnana vairagya yuktena bhakti yogena. This is a verse, 3:25-18. How this jnana and vairagya can be awakened? The jnana is there, but it is now covered. Nitya siddha Krishna bhakti sadhya kabunai shavanadi sutta anyway, Nitya siddha Krishna bhakti sadhya kabunai. It is stated in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that my relationship with Krishna is nitya siddha. In other words, eternal. Nitya siddha means it is eternal. It is not artificial. Not that we accept Krishna as my master or father or like this, artificially. This is eternal fact. But by forgetting Krishna, I am suffering. This is your fact. So if we want to be free from this fearfulness of life, and fearfulness in life, sada samudrigna diyam, that is the Prahlad Maharaj's advice. Prahlad Maharaj was asked by his father, my dear boy, what best thing you have learned from your teacher? So he said, tat sadhu manye suravarya dehinam, sada samudrigna diyam asat grahat, hitvatma patam griham andakupam vanam gato yad darim asriyatya. What has he learned? He says, that is the best thing. He said, tat sadhu manye asura varya dehinam. Anyone who has accepted this material body, that is asat. It will not stay. It's not eternal. But we have accepted this body. But we are so foolish that we do not know that I am not this body. I am separate from this body. Somehow or other, I am now entrapped or encaged in this body. Therefore, Prahlad Maharaj said, tat sadhu manye suravarya dehinam. Dehinam, dehi means, dehinam means one who has accepted this material body. And Vaishnava is surida sarvadehinam. Kapila Deva has said, a Vaishnava who is in connection with Krishna, his business is to go door to door and canvass everyone. My dear sir, you are not this body. You are wasting your time only under the concept of body. You are Krishna's. You become Krishna's servant. This is Krishna consciousness movement. My dear sir, you are not this body. You are not American. You are not Indian. You are not Brahmana. You are not Sudra. You are not cat. You are not dog. You are part and parcel of Krishna, and you serve Krishna. This is Krishna's consciousness. That's all. This is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's advice. Yare deka tarikaha Krishna upadesh. It is not very difficult. You haven't got to become a very learned scholar to become guru. Guru business is to give the right information. That is guru. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Amara Agyaya Guru Hana. Every one of you become guru. Oh, I am not a learned man, or I am this, or I am that. How can I become guru? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, no, it is very easy. Yare deka tahikaha Krishna upadesh. Amara Agyaya Guru Hana Tara Edes. Yare deka tarikaha Krishna upadesh. You become guru simply by advising everyone the instruction which Krishna has given. That's all. You become guru. It is not at all a difficult thing. But if you want to cheat others that you are Bhagavan, you are this or that, you are yogi, you are very powerful, and I am God, then you will cheat because you are neither God, you are less than a dog. You are falsely claiming that you are God. That is not your position. You are a servant to God. That is your position. That is real jnana. Therefore, Krishna or Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says that don't talk all nonsense things. Simply say the real thing. And what is the real thing? That is explained by Krishna. Sarvadharmam parityaja mahamekam saranam raja. Bhagavad Gita 1866. You take this mission, my dear sir, you give up everything nonsense. You simply surrender to Krishna. Then you become guru. It is very difficult to become guru? No. But we shall not take this business. We shall talk all nonsense and become guru and incarnation of God and so on, and cheat others and cheat oneself. So they don't want to accept what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said. They want to become guru by nonsense, right? Talking nonsense, blah, 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 blah. All kinds of nonsense things, you know. And then Darwinism is nonsense, and most material knowledge is nonsense. Right? So anyway, I'm not going to read the whole thing now, but we'll go over this purport by this lecture by Prabhupada because it's extremely important. So in other words, he said, Guru's business is to give real knowledge. So Mataji, she got real knowledge in Guyana. You know, she dropped out of school and just associated in the temple and learned to be a devotee. And she's still a devotee. So that is real knowledge. Okay, so then it says here, because in terms of respective inclinations inherent in the soul, the living entity, the requisite material body is offered to each and every one by the material energy under the direction of the supersoul. This is explained in the Bhagavad Gita 9.10. Maya dakshena prakriti suyate charachanam hetunanena konte jagat viparivartate. Krishna says, I control the material and spiritual energies. Everything material and everything spiritual. When therefore the supersoul is situated in the heart of the conditioned soul, the requisite mind is manifested in the conditioned soul, and he becomes conscious of his occupation as one is conscious of his duty after waking up from slumber, from sleep. Therefore, the material mind of the living entity develops when the supersoul sits on his heart, on the living entity's heart, after which the mind, the controlling deity, or the moon, and then the activities of the mind, namely thinking, feeling, and willing, all take place. The activities of the mind cannot begin without the manifestation of the heart, and the heart becomes manifested when the Lord wants to see the activities of the material creation. So Prabhupada is giving a very detailed, sequence of creation and how it's going on and how we are influenced by it. Okay, so therefore, it's necessary to have spiritual education. Otherwise, you're going to go off the rails completely and waste the rest of our life chasing after phantoms. Phantoms are illusory things. So when you chase after a phantom, you expend all your energy, you get exhausted, and then you realize the whole thing was a hoax. And that is exactly what material education does to people. Okay, so what time is it now? 5. Huh? 7:05. Yeah. So come back to Darwin, because Darwin is a complete nonsense. But to understand how completely he is a nonsense, we're going to look into it a little bit more. So it says, Prakriti kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasaha ahankara vimudatma kartaham iti manyate. The bewildered spirit soul, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, thinks himself to be the doer of activities which are in actuality carried out by nature. This is a very important verse, 3rd chapter, 27th verse of Bhagavad Gita. So Prabhupada says, nature is giving us all facilities. God, as the Paramatma within the heart of everyone, knows what the living entity wants. You see how there's a relationship between the purport we just read today, the verse today, right, in the 2nd canto, 10th chapter, 30th verse, and what's being said here in the book of Dialectic Materialism about Darwin, right? So Prabhupada is explaining. That's why I said yesterday, if you really want to understand Krishna conscious philosophy, you have to read this book. Right? 500 pages of deeper realization of what's in the Bhagavad Gita, or a more practical, let's say, explanation of what's in the Bhagavad Gita with examples, right? So the example is Darwin, who was a nonsense, right? But we have to understand why he's a nonsense. So, the bewildered spirit soul, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, thinks himself to be the doer of activities, which are in actuality carried out by nature. Nature is giving us all facilities. God, as the Paramatma within the heart of everyone, knows what the living entity wants and orders nature to give it to him. So, if I develop, because of bad association, I want a Tesla or a Lamborghini, and I want to get a big job in IT, making right from the beginning $150,000. Actually, now there's advertisements on the internet. You can start with $300,000 if you come and get trained by us in IT. That's what you see all the enticement there is. If someone said you can start in agriculture with $10 an hour, what? Not me. I want to start at $300,000 a year, right? All I have to do is learn how to code and this and that, and learn this AI and IE and OB or whatever. And I'm going to get $300,000. I don't want to get $10 an hour. That's a failure. You see how Maya, projects things, and the enticement is there in advertisement. I read this advertisement yesterday. It says start at $300,000, and it's a IT online school, and you better believe people are running toward it, attracted to it, they have that inclination. So, nature is giving us all facilities. God, as the Paramatma within the heart of everyone, knows what the living entity wants and orders nature to give it to him. So the devotee says, but presently we see that on this planet there are no longer any dinosaurs. That type of apartment is no longer available. Prabhupada, as I said before, you may or may not have seen dinosaurs. In any case, you have certainly not seen all the 8,400,000 species of life. This does not mean that these species are no longer existing. They may be existing on some other planet. You have no information of this. Scientists are experimenting with their imperfect senses, but we are receiving knowledge from a different source. Regardless of the amount of scientific research, the conclusions will always be imperfect because the senses are imperfect. See, Prabhupada, if this devotee was smart, he would have asked more questions about nature's giving us all facilities. God is the Paramatma within the heart of everyone, knows what the living entity wants, and orders nature to give it to him. He would have continued in that line, but he went off the rails. And he says, "Well, we don't see any more dinosaurs." So he could have pursued this subtle reality of inclinations of the living entity and how Maya is subverting the purpose of the human life by offering all these enticements. Start with $300,000. That's an enticement. That's a big enticement. So anyway, Prabhupada again knocks out all the nonsense. He says, look, scientists are experimenting with their imperfect senses, but we are receiving knowledge from a different source. Regardless of the amount of scientific research, the conclusions will always be imperfect because the senses are imperfect. And that's a fact. Then another devotee says, well, at first Darwin was a Christian, but his faith in the existence of a personal God eventually faded. He finally wrote the whole subject about the soul, God, and so forth. The whole subject is beyond the scope of man's intellect. The mystery of the beginning of things is insoluble by us, and I, for one, must be content to remain an agnostic. Now, this is a extremely foolish person, this Darwin. He thinks that because he can't understand something, he's going to ignore it, and he's going to advise other people, just ignore it. You don't have to know what the origin of creation is. This is what they're teaching the schools also. Yeah, you don't have to worry about how it all started. Let's just deal with what we see. And what do they see? They see very little. So this whole culture of nonsense is all pervading, and it's dangerous because it can derail a person from going back to Godhead and stay continually in the cycle of birth and death. The mystery of the beginning of things is insoluble by us, and I, for one, must be content to remain an agnostic. Actually, he was not an agnostic. He was just a demon. He based the origin of species on evidence he had amassed on a voyage around the world from 1830 to 1836. He didn't go around the world. He just stayed on the west coast of Africa. And devotee. Oh, Prabhupada. In any case, his research was limited. He certainly could not have investigated all the species on the planet. Devotee. He spent the rest of his life writing about the information he gathered during his voyage. According to his theory of natural selection, the best and fittest survive, and therefore the race necessarily and steadily improves. But then, in Kali Yuga, isn't there steady degeneration? Now, okay, let's understand a little bit more about Darwin's nonsense theory. He said that there's natural selection and survival of the fittest. He wasn't talking about genetic things because they had not discovered that yet. The genetic aspect of Darwin's theory was pasted onto it. Darwin only talked about natural selection and survival of the fittest. But then in modern Darwinists, they brought in genetic mutation also as a trigger for creating new species. Anyway, Darwin's idea had 3 points to it. He said, his idea of natural selection. He said that natural selection is a principle by which each slight variation of a trait, if useful, is preserved. So each slight variation, let's say you have just like our dogs, what's his name? Kartikeya's dogs. They gave birth to 6 little puppies, right? And each one of the puppies looks different, right? One of them is all fluffy and light colored, another one is dark, another one is brownish, so each puppy is different, right? And one mother gave birth to these 6 different looking puppies. So you see, animals are more powerful than human beings. They can give birth to 6 kids at a time, and each one looks different. So Darwin is saying that any slight variation of a trait, if useful, is preserved based on 3 principles: variation, heredity, and struggle for existence. Now, he doesn't explain what variation is. Heredity, he says, is a conservative force that transmits similar organic form from one generation to another. So everything he says is impersonal. How is it that there's such a thing as heredity, where you're getting, you're transmitting similar organic forms from one generation to another? What's the process of that? And who set that system up, right? And then he says, and then the third point is struggle for existence, which determines variations that alter species. So this was his way of constructing a theory. Now, that might seem plausible to ignorant people, but anyone who has half a sense of rationality would say, wait a minute, he's making all these big statements, but what's the mechanism for them functioning? How were they set up to function in these predictable ways, or in these specific ways? Then no one is challenging him. I'm sure people challenged him, but they didn't challenge in a way that Prabhupada is challenging here. Okay. So Prabhupada is saying, you have no information. Scientists are experimenting with their imperfect senses, but we are receiving knowledge from a different source. Regardless of the amount of scientific research, the conclusions will always be imperfect because the senses are imperfect. Okay, so that's a very important point. That's what we should accept wholeheartedly, that we have, every human being has 4 imperfections. They make mistakes, they're easily illusioned, their senses are limited and imperfect, and they have a cheating propensity. So therefore, we should not take information from sources who have these 4 defects. We should take information from sources that are perfect. So Krishna himself is speaking Bhagavad Gita. And then you have Krishna's representatives such as Brahma and Narada and Vyasa and so forth. So those are the people we should accept information from, or knowledge. Not all these speculators, because it'll just divert us from Krishna consciousness. Okay, well, so we'll stop right there. Are there any questions?
Maharaj, quick question. So in today's verse, the sequence by which the creation happens or the human body happens.
Yes.
So is that the case when a new baby also
Yes.
born in the womb, the same sequence of mind?
Yes.
And then all the other senses and all. Okay.
Yes.
And the other question was, is the Jivatma already conditioned when the soul was created, like when it was created?
We don't know when the soul comes into the material world, but it's sure that the soul has gone through many births and deaths already. And it's carrying a whole bunch of inclinations and karma with it. It's not that the soul was created last year. So where did it get all these inclinations from? No, we've been to get to the human form. We went through already 8,400,000 species. You know how long it takes to go through 8,400,000 species? We're talking about hundreds and millions of years, right? And so, you know, the weight of all those desires is there, right? So, no, and Prabhupada makes it a point. In fact, I can show you. Many places he says you cannot determine when the soul came into when the soul came into the material world. It never came into existence; it's eternal, right? But when did it come into the material world? You cannot determine it, because if you look at 8,400,000 species, it's over a huge amount of time. You know, it runs into trillions of years to go through all the species and come to a civilized human form. So I'm going to show you. 13th chapter, 13th verse. It said, Prabhupada says, Prabhupada says, chapter 13th verse. Let's see. Oh, I'm in the wrong. Okay. Yeah. He says, one cannot trace out the history of the jiva. Let me read the exact thing here. Nor can anyone trace out the history of the Jivatma's manifestation from the Supreme Lord. Therefore, it is beginningless. The Vedic literature confirms this. Najayate mriyate va vipaschit. Katha Upanishad 1.2.18. The knower of the body is never born and never dies, and he is full of knowledge. So we can't put a finger on this is when our soul fell down, because it runs into trillions of years, right? And he says that in many other places, that same point. All we know is that we're getting a whole flow of inclinations from our previous birth, right? And that's going to determine what kind of body we get. Okay, any other questions? Haribol. Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Maharaj, as you have explained, mind is different than brain.
Yes.
So, a long time back, I had some conversation with some person, non-devotee. So, he was also stuck.
Non-devotee?
Non-devotee. So, he was also stuck in the same thing when I was talking about mind. So, he was constantly referring mind as a brain. And it was...
That's the way the karmis are.
And it was very, like,
they
almost...
Don't see a difference. They don't know that there's a difference between the mind and the brain.
And it was almost difficult to explain, like, there's a difference.
No, he'll say, well, it's in the third cortical of the brain here. It's over on this side over here, where, that's where you want to have sex, over on this side of the brain. And then over here, it's, they've mapped the brain out.
So is there
Is
any...
he talking like that?
He was not going that deep, but but on a very shallow level, like he was considering mind and brain is just like a same.
Yes.
So how to explain?
Was he Indian?
Yeah.
They're the dumbest people in the world.
How to give some basic explanation so that they can at least start thinking in that direction?
Well, here you have a verse right here. You can read the verse to them. It says that It says, then the heart, the seat of the mind, right there, the verse today. Then the heart, the seat of the mind. So the mind is in the heart. It's not in the brain. He said, "Well, that's your books." Yeah, okay, but this is what we understand. You know, because the mind is subtle. It is not gross matter. It's not made of gross matter. It's made of subtle matter. The brain is gross matter. And obviously, there's confusion because the scientists only deal with matter. They don't deal with, and they don't understand subtle matter. They understand a little bit, but not much. Okay. Like, for example, information is being transmitted through electromagnetic waves. And there's information, there's pictures, there's films, there's people speaking, and it's all coming through these waves. Now, is the wave is subtle matter, right? And it's going through windows and going through walls, going through metal. It's a subtle thing. So that's an example of subtle matter right there. It's not located in one place. It can travel through space. So the mind is like that. It's a subtle matter. It is not gross matter. So there's one explanation. So he has to understand what is, according to the Vedas, the mind is not a material, a gross material thing. It's a subtle material thing. Just like an electromagnetic wave is a subtle material thing. And it can penetrate things like these windows and these walls. It's amazing, right? How is it your phone is working now? Something is coming through these windows and walls, and you're seeing people talk. You're seeing singing, dancing, all these things. How is that possible? It's a subtle thing. So there's an example of something material that's subtle as opposed to gross. The mind is gross. That's why. I mean the brain, I'm sorry. The brain is gross. Yeah. Okay? Haribol. Okay. Who's going to sing? You want to sing? Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakti Sadma
Bando Mui Savadhana Ate
Bando Mui Savadhana Ate
Jahara Prasade Bhaye E Bhabaturiya Jai
Jahara Prasade Bhaye E Bhavaturiya Jai
Krishna Prapti Hoye Jaha Aate
Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoyte
Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Kuriya aika
Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Shitite Goriya
আর না করি হো মনে আশা
Harana Koriya Mane Asa
শ্রী গুরু চরণে রতি এই সে উত্তম গতি
Shri Guru Charane Aise Uttama Gati
যে প্রসাদে পুরে সর্ব আশা
Ye Prasade Pure Sarva Asa
चक्षुदान दिलो जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से
Chakshudan Diraje Janme Janme Prabhu Se
दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो
Divyagyanidekasito
प्रेम भक्ति जहा होते अविद्या विनाश जते
Guru Karuna Siddha Adana Janara Bandhu
वेद गाय जहर चरितो वेद गाय जहर चरितो श्री गुरु करुणा सिंधु आधम जनर बंधु
Shri Guru Karuna Siddha Adana Janara Bandhu
लोकनाथ केरा जीवाना
Kena Bukira Jivana
आहा प्रभु करो दया देह मोरे पाद छया
Aha Prabhu Kura Doya Deya More Pada Chaya
आहा प्रभु करो दया देह मोरे पाद छया त्रिभुवाना प्रभुपाद पतित पावना
Patita Pavana
जय प्रभुपाद जय प्रभुपाद जय प्रभुपाद जय प्रभुपाद
Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada
जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा
Jaya Gurudeva Jaya Gurudeva Gurudeva Jaya Gurudeva
विष्णुपदाय कृष्णप्रस्थाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदांत स्वामीति नामिने नमः
Vishnupadaya Krishnaprasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine
नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे
Namaste
सरस्वती देवे
Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Vaskatya Desatarine
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Shadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Shadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Hare Hare
Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna
Krishna Krishna Hare Hare
Hare
Rama Rama Hare Hare
Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol
Gaura Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Jayo Vishnupad Paramahansa Pararajagachasta Tarasatra Shri Shrimad His Divine Grace Sri Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Antakoti Vaishnavindi Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Samakunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhana Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai Gaura Premanandi all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada Patita Pavani Ki Jai Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vistaya Bhuti Samati Bhakti Namaste Nirvisesa Sinyavadi Vaskatya Desatarine Haribol. Oh. The lotus feet are spiritual. The only way by which we attain the purity of service. I bow down to the lotus to be created in all reverence. My adoration across the ocean. My own
Purified. Fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him ecstatic fame emanates. By him ignorance is destroyed. Reveal scripture, sing of his character. Master, ocean of mercy, the front before, and the Lord of Master.